Welcome back to My Hero Academia Anime Review Episode 65. 3 days around My Hero Academia, really, Nick? Really? That's probably everybody watching this probably thinking. Well, there's good reason why. I finally watched the OVA they aired for Season 4. Yes, I finally watched it. And it was really good. Yep, now, basically with this one, it's technically a 2-part OVA, which is quite unusual. It's called Make a Do or Die Survival Training. Now, unlike the last OVA that was released, roughly for the 3rd season, where it was a 5-minute short, and they call this an OVA. Yeah, all it was promotion for the very first movie. Excuse me, this one had nothing to do with it at all. Like in the case of the first 2 OVAs, it kind of is canon. It takes place just prior to the last official arc they had for Season 4 before they start the overhaul arc with the last couple episodes. Yeah, it's actually set between, just not long after the events of the Hideout Raid and the pro license exam arc. Yeah, they say it's just before that. I'd say a day or 2 before that. It's possible. Now, pretty much they're doing a train exercise, and the class has to be split in half. Yep, split in half. So, basically, the focus characters we have on Team A is comprised of Ingenium, Momo, Froppy, Ochaku, Deku, Bakudo, Red Riot, Diki. Trying to think who else was in this team. Dokanori, he's the one who had Dark Shadow, Shudo, and Red Riot. And that was it. Yeah, surprisingly, that was it. I'm like, then what about the rest of the cast? But by the way, we don't ever see what Team B is up to during this OVA. Which I'm like, really? I get why we focus on these characters because they're the ones that get a lot of development, of course, the series. But why not show what Team B is up to? Maybe that'd be something for a future OVA. What exactly what Team B was up to? Maybe they would find it interesting because it's comprised of pretty much the rest of the cast. I mean, basically, if you look at it, it's simply put Team A is made up of a lot of the fan favorites of the series. I would say pretty much every single one of them on this team are fan favorites. I mean, technically, you have 3 girls in this team. And you probably think, okay, what about Visma Girl or Pinky? Or, I don't know. I think the only 2 I can think of are left. Of course, always there's Menta. Yep. Now, what their task is that they're went to a different location. They don't really go into detail exactly what they're up to. Team A is simply put this. Their job is to rescue a civilian trapped on the bottom of this mall. Basically, floor B6. Okay. And it's an underground mall. Yep. And by the way, this is a big training area. So, my guess is that the Japanese government must have spent millions of dollars, well, yen mainly, to build this facility. Just to be a testing ground for, of course, the superheroes. Okay, fine. So, they go underground mall and they split in teams. You have one team. Now, these are the teams. You have Ingenium Momo. Deku is on a team with Sue and Ochaku, which that kind of makes sense. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense because, well, of Ochaku's closeness with Deku. And, of course, Froppy's being very useful to him. And we also have one team comprised of... This is basically sort of unofficial. It's not put by Ingenium at all. It's basically we have a Bakudo, Diki, and Red Riot. Yep, and the other one's actually... And despite the fact Bakudo is somewhat of an idiot, he's actually quite smart, if you think about it. He actually knows certain things a little better. Oh, by the way, you have Shudo and Tamakari. They're on one team together, too. So, they pretty much do a lot of exploring. And then all of a sudden, while looking for... And of course, they mentioned there was a fire in this place. It's since put out. And then all of a sudden, while they're there, the place starts collapsing. And Deku's group is the first one to notice this. Yeah, when the floor just drops beneath them. And Froppy is the first one to go through the hole. And then it's Deku and then Ochaku. Which I'm like, okay. Yep. Excuse me. And of course, Ochaku saves Deku. And of course, you have the small recurring gag from season 1, mind you. Yes, where Froppy is still having to call her Sue, so Izuzu. Yeah, they call her by her last, and probably because it's traditional, everybody does. But she says everybody call her Sue. And she has politely correctly call me Sue. Yes, they brought back this gag from season 1. I was surprised about that because they kind of basically dropped that stuff for the first season, yet they brought it back for this. I thought it was kind of weird. They can't bring back this gag. Maybe it was Monica Real's idea. That, or probably it was how it was in the sub. But my personal theory, Monica Real probably brought this back because she liked doing it. Ribbit. Yeah, I think it was so funny. And by the way, Bakuto's group is actually the one that's actually more successful than anybody else. Because their group manages to get to the bottom floor with 0 problems, and they managed to turn the power back on. Yeah, they went to the original generator. There's something slightly damaged, and they figured out where it was via the fact that the place is like reinforced, and of course, Diki is one who turns it back on. Okay. As for Shudo and Tamakai, they are pretty much just walking about, and of course, Dark Shadow basically just goes wild, blocking the power got back on, and then he's like just doing like a lovey-dovey, like trying to apologize for something. Yeah, it's something though that made Dark Shadow like hilarious unintentionally. I'm not sure how the heck they managed to do this, but they made Dark Shadow funny, which that's interesting. In the case of Jenna and Momo, they don't do very much. I mean, Jenny simply is here with Momo. They're just basically walking, and then the place starts collapsing. Of course, and Jenny, being the gentleman he is, saves Momo from debris, and he, of course, gets injured, hurting his leg and his head. But lucky enough, lucky enough, Momo knows how to administer first aid, and of course, they have it where, just by sheer coincidence, Deku's group are just happily nearby. Yep, just by sheer coincidence. Yeah, they just happen to be in voices after the collapse, and they manage to get to them, no problem. And eventually they get to where an elevator is, and they figure that with all the collapsing going on, there might be a hole. And true enough, there is. And almost the entire group, minus Deku, gets to the surface, and of course, Momo managed to shoot a rope ladder out of her chest. Because she can create anything. It's something, though, that the whole thing with her is she can create anything out of her own skin. Like, she constantly does this a lot where she pulls stuff out of her chest a lot in the series. She's brought out freaking canon both in the movie and in the manga. I'm sure the Prime gets that in the current season. I wouldn't be surprised about that. Yep. Though here she brings out like a ladder, which apparently is like so long and basically is driving her near exhaustion. She's not the only one. Ochaku basically suffered from suffered to a stomachache. Yeah, they're the only two who actually suffered some minor problems with them. Froppy, nothing. She's had 0 problems at all, which is something. Diki, of course, when he turns power, he does go a little bit mopey. Let's just say he goes like doing the whole thing. He just smiles because he has a bunch of electricity. Though Bakuto, he tries to do 1 million votes. The Bakuto basically stops it and says, no, that'll actually wreck the place. So he just does recharging power. It looked like maybe like 100,000. Like, okay, that seems pretty reasonable enough. So, yeah, that's how basically Bakuto is basically a shouty guy. He's quite smart, which is something that the series doesn't even delve into very much. Excuse me. Yeah, so here's the thing. Deku is not the only smart one. I mean, people think that the only smart ones of the entire class are just Deku and Ingenium. Well, Bakuto's clearly smart. Momo is smart. I mean, not just because she's rich, but she is smart and they're basically good at strategies. And apparently Bakuto was good at strategies too. I mean, I can't wait to basically, when they actually show off his team and the fact he's the boss of the entire team. And by the way, his little exercise with his team versus Class of Team B, yeah, it lasted 1 chapter in the manga. 1 chapter. And that was it for them. I'm like, really? Well, not surprising. And they managed to follow his plan pretty easily. So, this is something, though, that he's managed to do this. So, they managed to find the fake civilian who's basically a test dummy. And they figured a way to get out of there. Ugh. Excuse me. Eventually, Shudo and Togoi meet up with, Bakuto's group. Bakuto stays behind with Shudo, while pretty much everyone else has to the surface. Of course, Deku goes to go after Bakuto and Shudo. So they basically use a geyser from basically freezing all the water that shoots straight to the surface. Of course, Deku basically steps in like, that's a good idea, but some of the surface is a little too hard for you to hit, so I'll basically break some of the surface when he breaks the ceiling. And they succeed. They managed to blast through 3 floors like no problem. And they do this in part 2, mind you. Yes, part 2. And then pretty much like as soon as they get to the surface, of course, Eraserhead is there with Recovery Girl. Yep. By the way, Eraserhead does nothing. He's like, apparently, according to him, the whole collapsing was in the test parameters. I'm like, did he stage the actual collapse itself? Because Eraserhead, one of your students got injured. Actually, 2 of them did. And you rigged it where 2 of your students would break their freaking legs, Eraserhead. Like, damn. Talk about being a terrible teacher, allowing 2 of your best students to get injured. I mean, one who happens to be the class president. Yep. Oh yeah, by the way, yes, basically Momo, when she brings out a stretcher, yes, a stretcher out of her chest, which that was probably not as exhausting as bring out a rope ladder. Yep. And, well, of course, Ember gets out, and of course, Bakuto breaks his leg. But here's the thing. Now, Deku himself is knocked out twice in this episode. Twice he falls unconscious. Which is interesting that he does this. The first time he wakes up, the first person he sees is Ochaku, which is something because these two have a thing for each other. Ochaku is very obvious. Deku is implied. The other one is Shudo, which that's interesting. Probably because the fact they're probably teasing something happening later on in the 2 arcs for the current one, basically going right now in the manga, where... And it's interesting, though, that it's these 3 basically finish up last, because these 3 would join the Endeavor Agency when they start up the Hero Studies again, which is interesting. I really think that's interesting that they do that. And they get out, and that's pretty much it. Overall, basically, this 2-part OVA is really good. It's got good pacing with it. I kind of wish that Funimation would edit these two episodes together. It's like if you look at it, it's roughly about, I'd say, about 50 minutes, I'd say, about an hour. So, I'm surprised they didn't do that. And this is fun fact about this OVA. It's the first one released outside of Japan. Yeah, it's also the first one that's dubbed. I think that they actually did dub the first 3. I don't know if I get a chance to look at it, but they clearly dubbed this one. Yep, all relevant voice characters are here. Excuse me, yep. This overall is really good. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, so that's it for Stick Review. Now, I am starting up a new anime series. We're thinking, really? It's about freaking time to do it, despite the fact that you already started 2 new anime already, Shaman King 2021 and Eden Zero. Well, this is not one of the bench-watching ones. Yeah, I haven't done one of these in a couple months due to the fact I spent a lot of time reading a lot of light novels. So, if you're curious, though, what series it is The Hidden Dungeon Only I Can Enter. I can presumably get done the first review of it today or probably tomorrow at the latest. Okay? See you next video. Bye.